Maggie. I'm a licensed clinical psychotherapist with degrees in psychology, theology, and marriage and family therapy, a national certification in dialectical behavioral therapy, and a national certification in integrative mental health. In this video, I'm not looking to diagnose anyone. I'm only willing to offer insight into situations like these. All right, before the rise of the great civilizations of Sumer, Kish, and Kemet, before any of the pyramids stood tall on the banks of the Nile or the ziggurats rose from the Mesopotamian plains, there was a people who laid the foundation for all of it, the Natufians, a people whose innovations shaped the destiny of humanity. And I wonder if any of you have ever heard of them. So today we're going to talk about it. But first, let me say hi to some people. Auntie is first. She's in the star position. Peace, Auntie, my favorite Auntie. Adric is in here. He says, let's hear it for the Dancing Maggies. Adrian Hicks is here. He says, let's go. Okay, so let's go. Okay, so let's talk about the Natufians. Okay, so their homeland, their region is what we call modern day Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. Look at that on a map. Compare it to something called Greater Israel. Just throwing that out there. You guys do that. You can do that. I'm not going to do that, but I think you should do that. All right, so the Natufians flourished between 12,500 and 9,500 BCE, so before the Common Era, at a time when most human societies were still all nomads. Okay, so there in the Levant, so this is an area, so when you hear Levant, same thing. So there in the Levant, something remarkable happened for the first time. They built the first known permanent settlements. So their villages stretched from the Jordan Valley to the Mediterranean, thriving in an environment that was rich in wild cereal. There was lots of game to hunt, water sources, water creatures. There was a lot going on there where it was like, hey, this might be a good place to hang out. Okay. So the Natufians were a very distinct people. Their remains reveal genetic links to both Northeast African and Saharan and Sub-Saharan populations. So they were Black African. Okay. So their skulls show that they were Black African and share markers with later rises of civilizations, making them the ancestors of those who would later build the great civilizations of Kemet and Mesopotamia, of which we have heard. Adrian says, wait, did you say that their land was from the river to the sea? I surely did. I surely did. Hopefully you guys can pick up some of what I'm putting down without me getting kicked off of YouTube, but it's going to get harder and harder to explain some stuff as we go through these Who Are series and the dots start connecting. So you can talk about what you want in the chat. I'm not going to say things out loud. Okay. So the Natufians, the first peoples, Black African peoples with this large area, were the first people to settle down in one area, okay, that we know of, right? So the Natufians were the first known people to live in permanent villages. Unlike their ancestors, they didn't rely solely on hunting and gathering, right? Because when you're nomadic, hunting and gathering up the food for the day is kind of what you got to do, right? So instead, they began a lifestyle that would evolve into agriculture. Now, archaeologists, some historians refer to these as sedentary lifestyles, meaning that they stay put, not sedentary as in everybody's lazy sitting around eating a bowl of cereal. Okay. So they harvested wild wheat, barley, and lentils long before there was full scale farming. So all of this stuff just grew wild, which for, 99.9% of human history, there was plentiful food most everywhere. Okay. um, think about when was the last time you saw just an apple tree growing with some fresh apples on it. Okay. That's how life was. Okay. So they used sickle blades. The first ones to use sickle blades with sharpened flint edges. So that is the very first evidence of a grain harvesting tool in human history. Yes, Adrian. I'm not going to say that one out loud. Hi, Leon. Yeah, he's got his hunting emojis going on. Now, interestingly, they built stone houses with storage pits for their surplus food. So each house had its own pantry. Okay. And they were made of stone. These were not, cutting down some trees, making reed huts and all these. These are stone houses this long ago. Okay. So the Natufians, hi, AB Media, thanks for being here. The Natufians are credited with building some of the earliest known permanent stone houses. So they're the first who figured out masonry. Okay. Not only did they settle down, not only did they make these tools, they became masons and made stone houses. This is why these people are so remarkable. This marks a crucial transition from the mobile hunter-gatherer life to the settled village life. The dwellings represent a fundamental shift in human society, paving the way for agriculture and for urban development. So, without them figuring all this out, we wouldn't have anything at this point. So, the Natufian houses were circular or a little bit oval in shape on some of them, with diameters ranging from 3 to 6 meters, which is like 10 to 20 feet. Hold on, I wrote myself a note somewhere and I got to make sure I hit on it. Well, we'll hit on it. We'll hit on it. Okay. The materials they used were limestone blocks. I'm going to say one more time, limestone blocks that were circular in shape. There were some other local stones that were mixed in and they were stacked and built sturdy walls. So most of the houses had sunken floors dug, not a ton, but slightly below the ground level, probably for some insulation and things like that. And some of them, the fancier ones, were also lined with stone or packed earth as insulation. We don't know what the roofs were made of because there's no intact roofs. So that kind of suggests, and there's a little bit of evidence to suggest that they were wood, reeds, animal hides, something like that. But some sort of supportive wooden beams were on the top. And then something was placed over them. Now, this is a very warm area. So I would assume it's something that could let some air in. Okay. So the Natufian stone houses served as multi-purpose living spaces. They were used for sleeping, all the daily activities like cooking, heating when it was chilly, all of that is in there. The pantry pits or the storage pits were either dug inside or near the houses. What was it called? Was it called a root cellar? I'm sorry. Like in my grandmother, great grandmother's age, things like that, you would dig a cellar to put your canned food in. And that was a way to keep it in the dark which is important for about bacteria, um, and as a storage place, and it doesn't get super hot, so digging out a cellar was still used back to great grandma's time, right? And more. So, um, this hints at an understanding that they had if they were gonna have surplus food, they would have to manage their surplus food, and they figured out how to do it real easy. Make it sound real easy, right? But these people are doing all these things for the first time. So they're just figuring it out. They made flint tools, grinding stones, made their own beads. All of this was within the home. So everybody had their own tools to make their own food and had their own storage. So these stone houses weren't just for shelter, but it was for the daily activities of the family or the family units that lived inside each one of these houses. Yeah, okay, Adrian. Okay, I was right. Root cellar. Yeah. So, in some cases, the Natufians buried their dead either inside or near their homes. And this is the first time we're also seeing them people bury their dead, right? The importance of that is that indicates a spiritual connection. That indicates that you have to care for the dead, okay? It's not just, "Oh, granny died. Take her out in the jungle because it gets to stinking after a while," you know? And especially nomadic, you just kept it moving, right? But if they're burying their dead, this means that there's this spiritual belief system, but also that they believe in a connection to their ancestors, to the people who have died on the other side. So we put care and energy into that. And the interesting thing about the Natufians was they also kept dogs as pets, which I'm sure they're working dogs. You know what I mean? Like they had to be. So um, we'll talk about some people in a few episodes that utilized dogs, their pet dogs, also as warriors. Kind of think police dogs, So the warriors had dogs, and so they're their pets, but they're also part of the warriors. So we will talk about that. But there's some sort of connection there. Okay. So some famous sites with the stone houses is in Einan, Israel, Eynan, also called Ain Mahala. And it's one of the earliest and most well-preserved Natufian villages, showing the circular stone dwellings and the early food storage techniques. Okay, now remember, this is like 12,000 years ago. Okay. And then in Palestine, we have the Shukba cave, Shuqba, and that's a key site where Natufian artifacts and evidence of early stone construction were discovered. So more of the houses, constructing of the buildings, those kind of things. And then in Jordan, we have the Wadi Hameh, so Wadihammeh. This is a well-documented Natufian settlement with stone structures and evidence of long-term habitation. So, who in here, put your hand up if you've heard of the Natufians before? Because it's a spectacular story and leads to so much. And it's wild to me that in school, we don't hear about the Natufians. Also, question: what other circular stone buildings, these ancient circular stone buildings, what other ones do we find? From what other cultures? I want you to think about that, right? Because pyramids, they're square on the bottom and make a triangle, right? The ziggurats are, well, they're sort of pyramidal, but it's like steps that go in with a small room on top that's a flat top. But there's other places that have circular stone buildings. And if you watch the Britannic show, you will know where some of those are. And one of them is in North America. So points to you if you remember where in North America it is. So you got extra credit if you do that. Adrian says, none. Nobody else built anything ever, not until the Empire State Building. They're not there. We can't find them. They're gone. Who? What are you talking about? That's kind of what it feels like history is, right? Like, nah, nah. One of the things, just as a side note, because you said it, that I'm noticing is as we're making genetic discoveries about ancient peoples like the Natufians, um, and subsequent, like the Mesopotamians, ancient Kemet, which is Egypt, by the way, from the inception of Kemet, Egypt, all the way up and over the top of the apex of the greatest civilization of all time in Kemet. What we find is, they're primarily all and ruled by Black Africans. As we're finding more and more of this out, I'm starting to notice that there's this very very insidious trend from ancient times, from religious writings all the way up to now, that the powers that be or whoever is in charge starts demonizing knowledge, like the snake on the tree of life, like driving the snakes out of Ireland. But most recently, when we found out that the Mesopotamians were Black and the people who moved into Samaria were initially Black, then I'm starting to hear the story in religious circles that, oh, these are the people that Cain gave all of the, what do they call it? Evil knowledge. And that the Tower of Babel, the Hamites, which I don't buy into, we'll talk about that, were worshiping science as a god. They were all studying the 7 sciences that came from the evil Cain, and this was evil and demonic. And I'm just like, knowledge is demonic. So yeah, I'm starting to see that when we see that there's a great civilization and it turns out, oh my goodness, they had Black skin and we're from Africa, the panic ensues and we have to figure out a way to be dismissive of this. It's kind of crazy. But he reminded me of that when he says nobody built anything ever, not until the Empire State Building. It reminds me of that. Okay. So other circular buildings, I'm not seeing any comments yet, but we have Stonehenge. We have in one of the Great Lakes, we just found one. They have some in Mesopotamia, in Sumeria, in Turkey. We did talk about Syria. What used to be called Phoenicia. So the Phoenicians. And so it's interesting if you kind of track that map of these circular stone stacked buildings. It's very interesting. Okay. So they were still hunters, right? The Natufians. They hunted gazelle, deer, and wild cattle. I mean, the fact that they had reserves of grains and they could hunt all these animals, think about how the world was then, how plentiful food was then. And think about the narrative that we're given now that there's just not enough. There's not enough. And yet we keep killing land and whatnot, and making it illegal to do certain things to provide for yourself. So they used bows and arrows, and their diet was a balance between the wild and the cultivated. So this is a precursor to what would later become full-scale agriculture and animal domestication. So they started it. They started all this stuff and we're figuring this out. So they did have the ritual burials, which we talked about, either in or right outside the house. They would bury their dead down deep, with individuals often buried. If they were buried outside, they were close to the houses, but they were kind of buried close together. So this is first cemeteries, where you can go and visit the dead, right? And these burial spots were decorated with jewelry made from African red seashells, suggesting long distance trade and their spiritual traditions. Now, when I talked about they were the first to have pet dogs, they also had so much love and such a relationship with their pet, and this is why I say pet dogs, that they ritualistically buried their dogs as well in the cemeteries. So that is the very first sign of human beings having pets that they love. Isn't that cute? I just think that's adorable. Okay. So the Natufians were the first in known history to live in permanent settlements rather than roaming as nomads. They were the first to harvest and store grains, setting the foundation for agriculture. They were the first to craft sickles, and that is evidence of one of the first farming technologies. They were the first to bury their dead with symbolic objects, which is a sign of spirituality and probably complex spirituality. The first to engage in long distance trade, linking the Levant to Africa. Whew, that's a lot. See how spectacular these people are, and we never learned of them. So their ideas and way of life spread, influencing the civilizations that followed. The Natufian world was the spark that led to the first cities in Mesopotamia and the legendary kingdom of Kemet and Kemet. 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 They have proven that genetically, okay, that these people, the Mesopotamians, came from the Natufians, who came from Africa, who were Black. So everybody got that? Okay. So this is why when I talk about like Mesopotamia, Sumeria, Kemet, Cush, Kish, all of those, I am firm about saying these people were Black because they've genetically proven that they came from the Natufians, and they've already proven that the Natufians were Black. So if anybody needs that, take it how you want it. Okay, AB Media says Phoenician culture is where we get our alphabet from. The Greeks learned from them. Oh, yeah, from the Phoenicians. Yep. Yep. And by the way, Phoenicians were Black too. Anyway, so from their innovations, from the Natufian innovations, came the first great civilizations, and genetically. The Natufians gave birth to the rise of Sumer, right? Where the first writing, mathematics, and organized cities emerged. Okay. Kish, one of the earliest powerful city-states of Mesopotamia, and Kemet, where the Black African dynasties of pharaohs built an empire that lasted for thousands of years. Did you guys also know they recently did a genetic study on Ramses the Third? They already had done Ramses the First, and then Akhenaten and Tutankhamun. So you might have seen it because somebody put out a thing about Tutankhamun saying, oh, he had a club foot and this and that and the other. And they did this sort of rendering of him where he's like the color of my sweater, which is like beige, and had a cane, and he was like pudgy and fat and all this kind of stuff. Because that was the only part they pulled out of that genetic study was like the club foot kind of thing, and that he probably had gout. Most kings had gout. You ate terrible because you could have it, right? But what they found out was they knew Ramses the First was Black, and they kept saying that Ramses' line, that his Black line did not continue, right? That it just got mixed in and watered down and washed out and blah, blah, blah. Ramses the Third, still Black, 100%, Saharan and Sub-Saharan Black, and that Akhenaten and Tutankhamun were also 100% Black. So this is what we talk about when, while there may have been other, I guess, ethnicities or phenotypes of people In Kemet, the great civilization of Egypt, of course, the dynasties were Black African families. Same with Mesopotamia. You might have heard of the King's List. So the King's List comes from Mesopotamia, and it's a list of thousands and thousands and thousands of years of kings up to and then beyond what they call the Great Flood. And the interesting thing about that is finding out, of course, that all these men, all these kings were Black, and then finding out that the tablet was stolen by American troops during a war in the 90s when we were searching for big things that go boom. It got stolen, among other things, from the Mesopotamian Empire. But this was like, this is a large tablet of thousands of years of Black kings. So it got stolen. The other stuff that got taken was taken to the British Museum, which, if you guys don't know, has 7.2 million items, a lot of which was taken from other places. So nobody knows where the King's List is. It disappeared. We don't know. Okay, so the strongest genetic ties exist between the Natufians and the early Nile Valley peoples, particularly those in the Sudan, Ethiopia, and the Great Lakes region, whose descendants carry similar language structures and cultural traits into the rise of Kemet. Okay, so the linguistic evidence suggests that the Natufians spoke a Proto-Afro-Asiatic language, which evolved into the Semitic languages of Mesopotamia, the Cushitic and Nilotic tongues spoken in ancient Nubia and Kemet, and the Berber languages of North Africa, all thanks to the Natufians. So the continuity in language, culture, and genetics between the Natufians and those civilizations proves that the first major societies were not these separate, isolated events by a multitude of different people, but part of a long African lineage stretching back thousands of years. Okay, so these are the forgotten architects of all civilization as we know it, right? Because we do know, like AB said, the Greeks, the Romans, the British, and I hate that word, took things and repurposed them during colonial expansion, etc. So, though their name is not well known as words like Sumer or Kemet, the Natufians were the true architects of civilization. Their discoveries shaped the course of human history, influencing the cultures that gave us writing, mathematics, architecture, and governance. So, their legacy lives on in language, customs, and the very DNA of the people who built the first kingdoms. So, in reading about the Natufians, this reminds me of an African proverb that I heard once, and so it's kind of fitting, right? And it's "We are because they were." Isn't that interesting? I think I heard that from Maya Angelou once, but somebody told me that is actually kind of an ancient proverb, so I liked it. What do you guys think? That was a long one, right? So that was only 34 minutes. But it's important to know who the Natufians are because we have to know the genetic links to things as we're talking more and more about the Who Are series. So if you haven't been watching those, you may want to go back and give a quick listen to some of those because it's all going to be tied together at some point very soon. And I think you'll understand. So next Sunday is going to be Who Are the Khazarians? So that will be an interesting one. I sure hope you all can make it. This is the Best Live Tribe on YouTube. So I want to see you all there. I miss you when you're not around. But this coming Wednesday, we're continuing on with JJ Hurtak's The Book of Knowledge, this one with all my bookmarks in it. And we're going to be doing light languages, formats continuing to evolve a little bit. So on Monday, the full reading will come out and a short with the key will come out. Shout out to y'all, Borgen. And then on Wednesday, we're going to spend all of our time breaking down the reading. So we're not using up a lot of our time to get through the text. So hopefully, if you can't be there this Wednesday, if you're not on that series, that you can be back on Sunday for the Who Are the Khazarians episode. I appreciate it. Adric says, I'll be there. Leon says, now that's interesting. I'm glad you liked it. All right. I hope you all have a good Sunday. This is a bit of a shorter one. So enjoy the rest of your day. And if I don't see you Wednesday, I'll see you Sunday. Oh, I almost forgot. I love you. I miss you. And you're my favorite. Please like the video if you haven't already. It really helps the algorithm to know what kind of things you like. Share where you think it's appropriate, especially to someone who you think needs to hear it. And don't forget to check out some of the wilder Pivot Point Wednesday shows. And last, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, especially if you want to break down complex concepts that make the esoteric not soteric, helping you on your journey to become your most authentic self. By subscribing, you'll join a community that thrives on curiosity and growth, and you'll never miss out on insights and some wild discussions. Let's uncover the universe together. Bye.